Welcome to the Health and Healing from the Inside Out podcast with Stephanie A. Wynn, an online health and wellness podcast where I, your host, will provide weekly wellness tips about inflammatory bowel disease, specifically Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. The Health and Healing from the Inside Out podcast is a mixture of special guest interviews from healthcare professionals, IBD survivors, Crohn's survivors, ulcerative colitis survivors, and community thought leaders. Be sure to select the subscribe button and let's start the health and healing process from the inside out. We are back for another episode of the Health and Healing from the Inside Out podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie A. Wynn, and today we're going to talk about an important topic that affects many people. This week's topic, we're talking about IBD versus IBS. They are not the same. So let's get right into it. But before we get right into this topic, I want to talk about our mindset. Before we can start the healing process, it truly starts with our mind. What do I mean by that? I mean that you need to have a growth mindset. You need to have a mindset that you are healed, that the healing process is available to you. If you truly believe that you can heal, again, you can't keep having the scarcity mindset where you're in fear all the time about the diagnosis. You can't live in fear all of your life. And living in fear causes dis-ease. And dis-ease, well, you know, it's disease, right? And so with inflammatory bowel disease, for all of my IBD community who are, suffering in silence, we have to eliminate that fear. So we're no longer going to have that fear mentality. We're going to have a growth mentality. And that mentality is like a healing mentality. Like, I am going to heal. Like, I am healed. And you have to believe it. You have to believe it deep down inside. So let's get right into this week's topic, IBD versus IBS. They are not the same. So let's talk about this. IBD, it stands for inflammatory bowel disease, which is a chronic inflammatory condition of the gastrointestinal tract. There are two main types of IBD. One is called Crohn's disease, and the other one is ulcerative colitis. Well, I have both. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in my large intestines and Crohn's disease in my lower colon. And so my stomach, my intestines were really angry. Like, the only way I can explain this to you is that I'm looking at a stop sign. If you look at the stop sign, how red it is, that's how red my intestines were. That's how red my colon was. And we really have a long way to go. I've come so far, but I still have a long way to go with getting myself up to where I need to be, right? So let's talk about IBS. IBS, my friends, it is irritable bowel syndrome. So IBS, on the other hand, is a functional disorder of the gastrointestinal tract. IBS does not involve inflammation or damage to your bowel. So IBS is something that you can really, if you really put in the work and change your environment, change your mindset, change what you're eating, change the stress that you're taking in. Most of it is what you're eating. Like, your diet has a lot to do with dealing with IBS. I, on the other hand, I didn't have the opportunity of being diagnosed with IBS because for so long I suffered in silence. So I'm pretty sure I was at one stage I was there at IBS, but I, was diagnosed IBD. It was just ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, right? So one of the main differences is that IBD involves inflammation and damage to the bowel, while IBS does not. In addition to that, it is a chronic condition that can lead to serious complications such as a bowel obstruction, perforation, and even colon cancer. So that's why our mission at the Stephanie A. Wynn Foundation is to remove the health and financial disparities in the underserved African American communities, specifically those that are diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease, so that they can have such a better life and get equitable health care. That's what our goals are, right? So remember, while IBS is generally considered to be a functional disorder that is not associated with any serious health risk, if you're dealing with both of them, like if you're dealing with IBD or if you're dealing with IBS, I'm going to provide you with 3 tips, right? This is the 3 tips for this week's episode. Sometimes we self-diagnose things, symptoms, and we don't have no clue what's going on. So now, tip number 1, get a proper diagnosis. It's important to get an accurate diagnosis from a GI doctor or a gastroenterologist to determine whether you have IBS or IBD. I promise you, it's going to save you so much frustration on the back end. The treatment and the management of your condition is very different. So it's crucial to get the right diagnosis. Listen, I went through 3 GI doctors before I got to the GI doctor that I have now. And let me tell you something, like, you have to understand and you have to have a healthcare professional who understands where you are. This episode is brought to you by the Let's Talk Inflammatory Bowel Disease Health and Wellness Symposium, a health and wellness symposium hosted by the Stephanie A. Wynn Foundation, whose focus is on raising awareness of inflammatory bowel disease, also known as IBD, among African Americans who are disproportionately affected by this chronic illness. The goal of the symposium is to partner with healthcare community partners to support underserved African Americans living with inflammatory bowel disease in their pursuit to live a more quality life. This symposium, it is sponsored by our exclusive sponsor, which is Moffitt Cancer Center, who have come aboard to sponsor and believe in this symposium. We're going to have gastroenterologists there, mental health and wellness clinicians to speak about the importance of mental health when you're diagnosed with a chronic illness such as IBD. And in order for you to get on your journey of health and healing, we'll also have dietitians and nutritionists there to talk about your diet. Now, specifically for Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, it is definitely important. We'll have our exclusive community healthcare organizations, our financial exclusive well-being organization there, and we will also have a healthcare carrier there on site to sign you up for health insurance. Now, listen, this is not the normal symposium where you go and you hear a lot of people talk. We're actually getting things done on top of educating our community. One thing I do know is this: being diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease, and being in the African American community, our treatment of healthcare is totally different compared to other cultures. And so we are wanting you to join us. Come join the conversation about the IBD healthcare disparities. This is going to take place again Saturday, March the 25th at 9 a.m. at Clearwater, Florida. And it's going to be at the Carroll Hotel. And the information is going to be in the show notes. Now, listen, if you're unable to attend in person and you would like to sponsor or you would like to donate to the cause, I'm going to drop the link in the show notes as well. Without further ado, we're going to get back to the show. And thank you for your time. Peace. Tip number 2, you got to know your triggers. Both IBD and IBS can be triggered by certain foods, stress, and other factors. You got to keep dairy. You got to keep away from certain foods. So keeping a food diary, which is what I did, and paying attention to your symptoms to identify your triggers is going to help. Like for me, stress is the culprit to my flare-ups. So my family, they know not to bring me any drama. They know not to bring me any stress, other people's problems. No, there are boundaries. Like I don't bring that to my house. Even I remember my youngest son would come home from work and be angry, and I would push him right back out the door. Hey, get out my house with that. Go sit under the tree, take some deep breaths in and out, but do not bring that energy in my house. And I mean that, like it is so, because let me tell you something. IBD, the flare-ups, they feed off of stress. It's almost like they're waiting. It's almost like ants. You drop a crumb of food, it's waiting to attack you. I'm just saying, that's just how much like this thing is real. So once you know your triggers, like, and once you know what triggers you, like and the symptoms that's involved in the triggers, you can make a lifestyle change to help you manage your condition much more. So self-care is so important when you're dealing with IBD or IBS. You have to make that a part of your regimen, like self-care. That I'm not talking about getting a pedicure or a manicure. I'm talking about meditating, breathing techniques. Maybe you need to go and sit in a sauna. Maybe you can go and do stretching, yoga, whatever you need to do to get your mind right and to get this condition under control. Now, let's go into tip number 3. You want to take care of your mental health. This should have been number 1, but I saved it for the last because anytime you have a chronic diagnosis, it affects your mental. Like it affects you from the inside out, right? And so dealing with IBD or IBS can be stressful and take a toll on your mental health. It's important to take care of yourself and seek help if you need it. In the African American community, we hear this all the time. Oh, if I go to a therapist, that means I'm crazy. I'm not crazy. I don't need to see a therapist. There's nothing wrong with me. Listen, let me tell you something. Each and every one of us on this earth, there's a bunch of people living, right? And at some point on our journey or some point on your journey, you're going to experience some type of PTSD, adversity, some type of thing that is going to blow your top off, right? And it may be something that you really can't deal with. Grief, right? Diagnosis, right? Maybe the kids are acting up. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to deal with that. And sometimes your brain can only take so much. That's why I talked about the self-care and incorporating self-care. You want to make sure that you also have a mental health doctor on your healthcare team when going through this journey of IBD and IBS, right? When you're dealing with this, taking care of your mental health is so vital. And this can include therapy, meditation, or simply making time for activities that you enjoy. So again, remember, IBD and IBS are not the same conditions and require different treatments and management strategies. If you're dealing with symptoms of either condition, it's important to seek medical advice and get an accurate diagnosis. Now, listen, I'm not a doctor. I don't have those alphabets behind my name, but I am an IBD survivor. So I live with this condition every day. And I do know this, is that you will need to get your mental health under control. At some point on this journey, you will need to talk to a mental health doctor, psychiatrist, psychotherapist, whatever you need to get your mental on the right track. You can overcome IBD. I thought my world was over, my life was over. But I had to change the way I thought, know your triggers, taking care of your mental wellness, your mental health. I'm telling you, if you have a strong mind, nobody can take that from you. And there's a lot of people that are dealing with weak minds. That's why you can't start the healing process. So I'm your host, Stephanie A. Wynn. Thank you for tuning in to the Health and Healing from the Inside Out podcast. Join us next week for more insights on how to achieve your optimal health. Again, remember, the Health and Healing podcast is simply, we're here to help you live and overcome this thing. Get proper diagnosis, know your triggers, take care of your mental health, and go see a professional doctor. I've given you these jewels. Until next time, peace. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Health and Healing from the Inside Out podcast, an online health and wellness podcast where I, your host, Stephanie A. Wynn, will provide weekly wellness tips about inflammatory bowel disease, specifically Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Be sure to select the subscribe button and let's start the health and healing process from the inside out.